The Arizona Territory in 1882 was a land that gave no quarter and asked for none. It was a place where life was measured in the inches of water in a creek bed and the seconds it took to draw a gun. For Vienna May Dalton, a woman who knew the bite of the sun and the ache of solitude, life was about survival, not sentiment. But on a day choked with dust and thunder, she faced a choice that would echo across the canyons. A sea of horns, a tidal wave of panicked longhorns, bore down on a single wounded child. The child was Navajo. Saving her would mean riding into the jaws of certain death. Leaving her would mean losing a piece of her own soul. What she didn't know was that her choice, made in a heartbeat, would not end with the dust settling. It would begin a new storm, one that would challenge every belief she held and demand a price she never ever imagined. The heat was a physical weight on Vienna's shoulders. It pressed down from a merciless white-hot sky, baking the alkali flats of the Dalton Ranch into a cracked and barren canvas. For 3 weeks, no rain had fallen, and the very air felt brittle enough to shatter. From her vantage point on the low mesa, mending a stretch of fence line that had been snapped by God knows what, she could see the family's small herd of cattle huddled listlessly by the nearly dry creek bed. They were thin, their hides stretched tight over their ribs. Another month of this, and her father Bartholomew would have to start selling them off for pennies on the dollar. Vienna, or Vivi, as everyone called her, wiped a bead of sweat from her brow with the back of a calloused, leather-gloved hand. At 24, her face was already a map of the territory. Fine lines etched around her eyes from squinting into the sun, her skin tanned to the color of worn saddle leather. Her light brown hair was braided tightly to keep it from whipping into her face, a practical measure against the incessant wind that offered no relief, only a swirl of hot dust. She was not a woman given to flights of fancy. The West had hammered that out of her, replacing it with a pragmatic resolve as hard and unyielding as the land itself. She finished cinching the new wire, the metal hot to the touch, and stood up to survey her work. It was then that she felt it, not a sound at first, but a tremor. A low, persistent vibration that hummed up through the soles of her worn boots and into the bones of her legs. Her horse, a sturdy buckskin gelding named Buck, felt it too. His ears swiveled his head, snapping up as he stared intently to the north, his nostrils flaring. Vivi's eyes followed his gaze. At first there was nothing but the shimmering heat haze dancing above the plains. Then a faint brown cloud appeared on the horizon, growing larger, darker, and more ominous with unnatural speed. The low hum intensified, resolving itself into a distinct and terrifying sound, the rolling thunder of 1,000 hooves. Stampede! She breathed the word, tasting like grit and fear in her mouth. It wasn't their herd. It was too large, moving too fast. This was a trail herd, or worse, a consolidated herd belonging to one of the big cattle barons, likely being pushed hard and recklessly. She swung herself into Buck's saddle, her movements fluid and economical from a lifetime spent on horseback. Her first instinct was survival, to get to higher ground, to ride clear of the path of the oncoming devastation. The wave of horns and hooves would obliterate anything in its path. She wheeled Buck around, ready to spur him up the rocky incline of the mesa, when a flicker of movement near a cluster of sun-bleached cottonwoods caught her eye. It was down in the wash, directly in the path of the stampede. Squinting, she saw a small, riderless pony on the ground, its leg bent at an impossible angle, and beside it, a small figure. A child. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Every instinct screamed at her to save herself. The dust cloud was a monstrous, churning beast, now the roar of the cattle, a physical force that battered the air. She could see the leaders, their eyes wide with terror, their massive horns glinting in the sun. They were less than a mile out and closing fast, but she couldn't turn away. The image of the small, solitary figure was burned into her mind. Cursing her own conscience, she yanked on Buck's reins, turning him away from safety and urging him down the treacherous scree slope toward the wash. "Come on, boy, higher!" she yelled, her voice nearly lost in the growing din. Buck, brave and sure-footed, scrambled down the slope, sending rocks skittering. As they reached the flat, sandy bottom of the wash, Vivi saw the scene clearly. The child was a girl no older than 10 or 11, her dark hair unbound. She was wearing a simple deerskin dress and beaded moccasins. She was Navajo. Her face was contorted in pain as she tried to pull her leg out from under her dead pony. The ground was shaking violently now. The led steer was only a few hundred yards away. There was no time. Vivi leaped from the saddle before Buck had even skidded to a halt. "I'm here to help!" she shouted, hoping the girl understood. The girl's dark eyes, wide with pain and terror, fixed on Vivi. She didn't scream or cry out a stoicism that struck Vivi even in the heart of the chaos. "Your leg is trapped." Vivi grabbed the girl's arms, trying to pull her free, but the weight of the dead animal was too much. The smell of dust, sweat, and blood filled her nostrils. The roar of the herd was deafening, a physical presence that threatened to swallow them whole. There was only one way. Drawing the Bowie knife from the sheath on her belt, Vivi dropped to her knees. "I'm sorry," she said, not knowing if the words meant anything. She began hacking desperately at the leather trapping and the pony's flesh around the girl's pinned leg. It was a gruesome, frantic task. Muscle and hide gave way under her frantic sawing. The first wave of cattle was upon them, splitting around the small cluster of cottonwoods like a river breaking on a rock. But the main body of the herd was coming straight on. Finally, with a sickening tear, the leg came free. It was mangled, clearly broken, but the girl was loose. Without a second's hesitation, Vivi scooped the child into her arms. The girl was light, but Vivi staggered under the dead weight, her lungs burning. She threw the child onto Buck's saddle. "Hold on!" she screamed, grabbing the reins and a fistful of mane. She tried to swing up behind the girl, but a massive steer, its eyes rolling white, slammed into them. The impact threw them sideways. Vivi lost her grip on the reins, but not on the saddle horn. She scrambled, half running, half dragged alongside the terrified horse, shielding the girl's body with her own. Horns and hooves were a blur of motion, and death all around them. The hot, foul breath of the animals washed over her. It was a nightmare of sound and fury. Buck, in a panic, surged forward, finding a momentary gap in the tide of bodies. It was just enough. Vivi used the momentum to heave herself up behind the child, her legs screaming in protest. She wrapped one arm around the girl's waist, holding her tight against her chest, and grabbed the reins with the other. "Go, Buck, go!" she shrieked, kicking her heels into his sides. The buckskin responded, launching himself forward, weaving through the living labyrinth of death. A horn grazed Vivi's thigh, tearing her jeans and the skin beneath. She cried out in pain, but held on her focus, locked on a rock outcropping to the west, their only hope of sanctuary. They were no longer running from the herd. They were in it, a tiny, fragile island in a raging river of flesh and bone. Every second felt like a lifetime. The world was a chaotic blur of brown hides, dust, and the constant, terrifying thunder that seemed to shake the very foundations of the earth. Finally, with one last desperate surge, Buck broke free from the edge of the herd, his sides heaving, his coat slick with sweat and foam. Vivi didn't stop until they reached the base of the outcropping and collapsed in the relative quiet of its shadow. The stampede raged past them, a force of nature that went on for what felt like an eternity. Vivi held the unconscious girl, her own body trembling uncontrollably, the adrenaline draining away to leave a deep, aching exhaustion. She looked down at the child's face, serene now in unconsciousness, and then at the torn, bloody mess of her leg. She had saved her. But as the last of the herd thundered away, leaving a ringing silence and a thick pall of dust in its wake, Vivi had a sinking feeling that her troubles had only just begun. The ride back to the Dalton homestead was a slow, agonizing journey. The Navajo girl Nijoni, as Vivi would later learn her name, was drifted in and out of consciousness, moaning softly whenever the gentle jostling of the horse sent a fresh wave of pain through her broken leg. Vivi had done what she could, tearing strips from her own shirt to bind the wound and fashion a crude splint from a cottonwood branch. But she knew it was a poor substitute for proper medical care. The nearest doctor was in the town of Redemption, a full day's ride away, a journey the girl would never survive. The ranch was the only option. As the familiar weathered shape of the barn and the simple sturdy frame of the ranch house came into view, a knot of apprehension tightened in Vivi's stomach. She knew what this would look like. Bringing a Navajo child, an injured one at that, to the homestead was like carrying a lit stick of dynamite into a powder keg. Her father, Bartholomew Dalton, was on the porch, his tall, gaunt frame silhouetted against the setting sun. He was a man carved from the same hard rock as the surrounding mesas, his face a roadmap of hardships endured and disappointments weathered. He said little, but his silence could be heavier than any lecture. Standing beside him was her younger brother, William. At 19, William possessed all of their father's stubbornness, but none of his quiet wisdom. He was quick to anger his opinions forged in the fire of saloon gossip and casual prejudice that permeated their world. He saw the world in black and white, settlers and savages, us and them. Bartholomew's sharp eyes took in the scene. At once, Vivi's disheveled state, the blood on her torn pants, and the still form of the child she held so carefully. He walked down the steps, his movements stiff, his expression unreadable. "What trouble have you found now, Vienna?" he asked, his voice a low rumble. "Stampede. North pasture." Vivi said, her own voice hoarse with dust and fatigue. She slid carefully from Buck's back, cradling the girl in her arms. "Her pony was killed. Her leg is broken bad." William came forward, his face twisting into a sneer of disgust as he saw the girl's deerskin dress and dark hair. "An Indian. You risked your neck for an Indian child." "She's a child, William." Vivi snapped, her patience worn thin. "She would have been trampled. I'm putting her in my room." She pushed past him, ignoring the fury in his eyes. Bartholomew didn't stop her, but his silence was a tangible weight on her back. She carried the girl into the small Spartan house and laid her gently on her own narrow bed. The girl's eyes fluttered open dark and filled with a fearful animal-like panic. "Shh!" Vivi soothed her voice softer than she'd intended. "You're safe now. I won't let anyone hurt you." She wasn't sure if the girl understood the words, but the tone seemed to calm her. For the next 2 hours, Vivi worked tirelessly. She sent William into town, less for the supplies, and more to get his toxic presence out of the house, with a list of laudanum, carbolic acid, and fresh linen bandages. While he was gone, she washed the girl's wound with the care and precision she usually reserved for tending to a prized filly. The bone had broken cleanly, but the flesh was badly torn. As she cleaned away the dirt and blood, she discovered the girl was wearing a simple silver and turquoise bracelet, the craftsmanship fine and delicate. This was not the child of some poor scavenger. She was loved, cared for. When Bartholomew appeared in the doorway, he simply stood and watched, his arms crossed over his chest. "Her people will come looking for her," he stated. "It wasn't a question. I expect they will Vivi replied without looking up. And what do you suppose happens then? They'll see one of their own injured in a white man's house. They'll assume the worst. They might think we caused this. Then I'll tell them what happened. Vivi said, her jaw set. I did the right thing, Pa. I couldn't just leave her to die. Doing the right thing out here can get you killed, girl. It can get us all killed. He said, his voice flat. He turned and walked away, leaving Vivi alone with the silent child and the weight of his disapproval. Later that evening, after William had returned, sullenly dropping the supplies on the kitchen table, Vivi sat by the girl's bedside. She had managed to set the bone as best she could, splinting it tightly. She'd given the girl a small dose of laudanum diluted in water, and the child had finally fallen into a deep, exhausted sleep. A bond unspoken and fragile was already forming between them. Vivi found herself watching the gentle rise and fall of the girl's chest, marveling at her resilience. She had seen so much violence and pain in her young life, yet there was an aura of profound peace about her as she slept. Vivi reached out and gently brushed a strand of dark hair from the girl's forehead. The peace was shattered by William bursting into the room. "There are riders coming," he said, his voice a low, urgent hiss. "Half a dozen of them. Apaches or Navajo. Can't tell from this distance, but they're armed." Vivi's blood ran cold. She stood up, her body aching with a weariness that went bone deep. She went to the front door and peered out into the deepening twilight. William was right. A group of riders sat on their horses on the ridge overlooking the ranch, their forms dark and menacing against the bruised purple sky. They weren't attacking. They were watching, waiting. Bartholomew stood by the window, a Winchester rifle held loosely in his hands. "They found us," he said, his voice grim. "I told you this would bring trouble to our door, Vienna. They're just looking for their girl," Vivi insisted, her heart pounding. "Let me go out. Let me talk to them." "Are you insane?" William scoffed. "They'll put an arrow in you before you get 10 feet. "They're not going anywhere," Bartholomew said, his eyes fixed on the figures on the ridge. "And neither are we. We wait for morning. Whatever happens, happens at dawn." The house fell into a tense, suffocating silence, broken only by the soft breathing of the sleeping child in the back room. Vivi felt trapped, caught between the unyielding prejudice of her family and the silent watching judgment of the men on the ridge. She had saved a life, but in doing so, she may have just signed a death warrant for them all. The long dark night stretched before them, pregnant with fear and uncertainty. The haven she had offered the small girl had just become a fortress under siege. Dawn broke cold and grey, painting the landscape in muted shades of charcoal and silver. The night had been sleepless, a long vigil spent listening to every creak of the house and every rustle of the wind, imagining them to be the sounds of an impending attack. But the attack never came. The riders on the ridge had remained as still and silent as stone effigies. As the first rays of sun crested the eastern mesas, a lone rider detached himself from the group and began a slow, deliberate descent toward the ranch. He was not a young, hot-blooded warrior. His movements were measured, his bearing regal. He rode a magnificent black horse and carried himself with an air of authority that was unmistakable. Vivi stood on the porch, her father and William flanking her rifles, held at a casual but ready state. Her heart was a frantic drum against her ribs, but she forced her expression to remain calm, neutral. This was the moment of truth. The rider halted his horse 20 yards from the house. He was a man in his late 30s, his face a mask of stern dignity, etched with lines of worry. His hair was long tied back with a simple leather thong, and his eyes were dark and piercing, missing nothing. He wore buckskin leggings and a simple calico shirt, but the quality of his saddle and the silver conchos on his bridle spoke of status. He dismounted with a fluid grace. "I am Tar," he said, his voice deep and resonant. He spoke English not fluently, but with a careful, deliberate cadence. "I seek my daughter. Her name is Nijoni. She was lost in the cattle run." Vivi stepped forward, ignoring her father's hissed warning. "She is here," she said, her own voice steady, despite her fear. "She is alive, but she is hurt. Her leg was broken." A flicker of emotion, raw, profound relief crossed Tar's stoic face before he mastered it. He took a step closer. "You have her." "I found her in the Stampede's path," Vivi explained, keeping her hands open and away from her sides. "Her pony was dead. I brought her here to tend to her wound." Tar's gaze was intense, searching her face for any sign of deception. He looked past her, to the grim faces of her father and brother, then back to her. "May I see her?" It was a risk. Letting him inside could be a trick. But looking into his eyes, Vivi saw not a cunning warrior, but a terrified father. She nodded. "She's sleeping. Come." Bartholomew stiffened his knuckles white on his rifle, but Vivi shot him a look that dared him to object. She led Tar into the house, into her small room, where Nijoni lay sleeping. The sight of his daughter, pale but breathing peacefully, seemed to drain the tension from Tar's powerful frame. He knelt beside the bed, his large, weathered hand gently touching her hair. He examined Vivi's handiwork on the splint, his expression unreadable. For a long moment he was silent, the only sound in the room, the girl's soft breaths. When he rose and turned to face Vivi, his eyes were filled with an emotion she couldn't quite name. It was more than gratitude. It was something deeper, more elemental. He followed her back outside into the morning light. His warriors remained on the ridge watching. "You saved the life of my only child," Tar said, his voice thick with emotion. "My wife walked the path of ghosts 2 winters ago. Nijoni is all I have left. The debt I owe you is one that cannot be paid with horses or silver." "There is no debt," Vivi said quickly. "She's a child. I did what anyone would have done." "No," Tar corrected her gently. "Not anyone. My people have known only cruelty and deceit from your kind. You showed honor. You showed courage." He paused, his gaze unwavering. "A life for a life. A future for a future. You have saved the future of my family, so I will secure yours." Vivi frowned, confused. "I don't understand." Tar took a deep breath, standing to his full impressive height. "Tar, leader of the Diné of the Red Canyon, ask for your hand in marriage." The words dropped into the charged silence, like stones into a still pond. Vivi stared at him, utterly dumbfounded. Of all the things she had expected, threats, demands, accusations, this was the one thing that had never entered her mind. Behind her, she heard William let out a short, incredulous bark of laughter, which was quickly silenced by a sharp look from their father. "Marriage," Vivi finally stammered, finding her voice. "You can't be serious. It is the highest honor I can offer." Tar said, his expression completely earnest. "You will be cared for. You will be protected. My people will become your people. Our alliance will be a bridge between our worlds. This is how such a great debt is repaid." Vivi's mind reeled. This wasn't a proposal of love or affection. It was a transaction, a matter of honor and debt in his world that was a complete and utter absurdity in hers. I am honored by your offer, Tar," she said, choosing her words carefully. "But I cannot accept. I saved your daughter because she needed saving. I ask for nothing in return." A shadow passed over Tar's face. It wasn't anger, but a deep, profound confusion, as if she had just insulted him in the most grievous way imaginable. In his culture, to refuse such a gift was to imply the giver or the gift was unworthy. "You refuse?" he asked, his voice losing its warmth. "I do," Vivi said firmly, though her stomach was churning. "I thank you for the offer, but my answer is no." Before Tar could respond, a new sound intruded, the clatter of shod hooves approaching at a canter. 3 riders were coming up the path from town. Vivi recognized the lead rider instantly, and her heart sank. It was Flint Maddox, the brutish and widely feared foreman for Leland Carmichael, the cattle baron, whose vast herds were slowly choking the life out of all the smaller ranches in the valley, including the Daltons. Maddox was a big man with a florid face and cruel, small eyes. He reined in his horse, his gaze sweeping over the scene with open contempt, lingering on Tar. "Well, well, Dalton," Maddox sneered, his voice dripping with condescension. "Looks like you're making some new friends. Didn't figure you for an Indian lover." "This is private property, Maddox," Bartholomew said, his voice dangerously low. "State your business or ride out." Maddox's sneer widened. "My business is with him," he said, hooking a thumb toward Tar. "That was Mr. Carmichael's herd that got spooked yesterday. We found tracks, a pony. Looks like one of your people," he said to Tar, "was trying to rustle a calf, caused a stampede that cost Mr. Carmichael a dozen head." It was a lie, and everyone knew it. Carmichael's men were notorious for running their herds recklessly, with no regard for property lines or safety. "My daughter was gathering herbs by the wash," Tar said, his voice cold as ice. "Your careless riders nearly killed her." Maddox laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "Is that the story? Well, Mr. Carmichael sees it different. He wants compensation. $50. Or we'll take it out of your hide." Vivi saw Tar's hand clench. He was a proud leader being spoken to like a dog. She saw William's hand tighten on his rifle, his hatred for Maddox momentarily overriding his prejudice against the Navajo. It was a standoff, a tinderbox of old hatreds and new conflicts, and Vivi was standing right in the middle of it. Her refusal of marriage had offended the Navajo leader, and her act of saving his daughter had now drawn the wrath of the most dangerous man in the territory. The morning that had begun with the hope of peace had just exploded into a far more dangerous and complicated war. Flint Maddox let the silence hang in the air, heavy and suffocating. He enjoyed the tension, savored the fear and anger he created. His eyes, like 2 chips of granite, moved from Tar's stony face to Bartholomew's grim one, and finally settled on Vivi. "What's it gonna be?" Maddox goaded, a cruel smile playing on his lips. "Is your new friend here gonna pay up? Or does the Dalton family now stand security for horse thieves?" Before Tar could speak, Vivi stepped forward. There was no theft, she said, her voice ringing with a conviction that surprised even herself. "I was there. I saw it. Your men were pushing that herd too hard. It was their recklessness that started the stampede. The girl was an innocent victim." Maddox's eyes narrowed. "You watch your mouth, girl. It's mighty bold of you to contradict me. Mr. Carmichael won't like that. He also won't like hearing that you're harboring Indians who cause him trouble." He leaned forward in his saddle, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that carried in the still air. "He's been looking for a reason to have the government push these savages further up into the barren lands, and he's been looking for a reason to foreclose on certain unprofitable ranches. You're helping him build a strong case on both fronts." The threat was clear, a double-edged sword aimed at both the Daltons and the Navajo. Leland Carmichael was a patient predator, using law intimidation and finance as his weapons. He didn't just want the land, He wanted it for free by driving everyone else to ruin. Tar understood the subtext perfectly. He saw the worry that creased Bartholomew Dalton's face. He saw the impossible position he had placed this family in. His personal honor had met the cold, brutal pragmatism of the white man's world. "The Diné do not pay for crimes we did not commit," Tar said, his voice a low, dangerous growl. He turned his back on Maddox, a calculated and deeply insulting gesture, and faced Vivi. "The girl Nijoni. When will she be well enough to travel? A week, maybe 2. Vivi answered, her mind racing. "The bone needs time to mend." Tar nodded. "I will return for her then." He looked from Vivi to her father. "Your family is now in danger because of my child. This is not right. My warriors will keep watch from the hills. No harm will come to this house." It was not a threat, but a promise of protection. A protection Bartholomew clearly didn't want. "We can take care of ourselves," Bartholomew said gruffly, though the statement lacked its usual force. They both knew Carmichael was too powerful to fight head-on. Maddox let out a final contemptuous laugh. "Protecting you. That's rich. Have it your way, Dalton. But remember, a man is known by the company he keeps." With a final glare, he wheeled his horse around, and along with his men galloped away, leaving a trail of dust and ill will. The moment they were gone, the fragile, tense alliance shattered. "You see," William exploded, gesturing wildly. "I told you. You bring one of them here, and now we've got Maddox and Carmichael on our backs. And for what? So you could play nursemaid to a savage. William, that's enough." Bartholomew snapped, but there was no conviction in his voice. He looked at Vivi, his face etched with a deep, weary anxiety. "The boy's right, Vienna. You meant well, but you've entangled us in something we can't win. Carmichael has been squeezing us for a year. Our credit at the general store is running out. Our cattle are thin. This is the excuse he needs to ruin us. So we should have just let him lie, let him extort an innocent man." Vivi shot back, her voice rising. "What you call innocent, the rest of the world calls trouble," her father retorted. He sighed, passing a hand over his face. "Tar's offer of protection will only make it worse. Carmichael will see it as us siding with the Navajo against him. He'll crush us." Tar, who had stood silently through the family's bitter exchange, now mounted his horse. His face was a mask of impassive dignity, but Vivi could see the conflict in his eyes. Her refusal of his proposal had been a blow to his honor, yet his duty to protect those who had saved his daughter was absolute. "My offer was not for you to accept or refuse," Tar said, looking directly at Bartholomew. "It is a matter of my own honor. Your daughter saved my blood. My men will watch. That is all." He turned his horse and rode back toward the ridge to rejoin his warriors, leaving the Daltons in a state of fractured, angry silence. Over the next few days, an uneasy quiet settled over the ranch. True to his word, Tar's men were a constant, silent presence in the high rocks, visible only as fleeting shadows or the occasional glint of sunlight off a rifle barrel. Their presence was deeply unsettling to William, who saw them as vultures waiting to swoop in. To Bartholomew, they were a public declaration of an alliance he didn't want, one that painted a target on his family's back. But for Vivi, their presence was a strange comfort. It was also a source of deepening complexity in her relationship with Nijoni. The girl was healing. The fever in her leg had broken, and with rest and the broth Vivi made for her, some of the color had returned to her cheeks. She was a bright, curious child. Though they had few words in common, they began to communicate through gestures and drawings made with charcoal on scraps of wood. Nijoni would draw the symbol for her clan, and Vivi would sketch a crude picture of a long horn. Nijoni would teach her the Navajo word for water, too, and Vivi would teach her horse. During these quiet moments, Vivi began to see the world through the child's eyes. She learned of a life deeply connected to the seasons, to the earth, to stories passed down through generations. It was a world away from the Daltons' relentless struggle for survival, their constant battle against drought, debt, and depression. A fragile friendship was blooming in the heart of the conflict, a tender green shoot pushing up through scorched earth. The peace, however, was an illusion. One afternoon, while checking the water level in their well, Vivi found the culprit behind their snapped fence line, heavy unshod hoofprints and the distinct cloying smell of rancid grease. Someone had been rubbing poison on the fence posts where the cattle liked to scratch themselves. It was a slow, insidious method of killing a herd. It wasn't Navajo work. It was the cruel, calculating work of men like Flint Maddox. Carmichael wasn't just making threats anymore. He had begun his war of attrition, and the Daltons with their failing ranch and their unwanted silent guardians were caught right in the crossfire. Vivi looked up at the impassive hills where Tar's men watched, and she understood. This was no longer just about a rescued child. It was about survival, and she was being forced to choose a side. The discovery of the poisoned fence posts sent a chill through the Dalton homestead that had nothing to do with the cool desert nights. It was a clear, undeniable escalation. This was no longer about intimidation. It was about annihilation, a slow, patient strangling of their livelihood. Bartholomew grew more withdrawn, his face a constant mask of grim preoccupation. William, on the other hand, grew more volatile, his fear manifesting as rage. "It's them," he declared one evening at the supper table, slamming his fist down so hard the plates jumped. "It has to be the Navajo. They're trying to drive us off same as Carmichael." "Use your head, William." Vivi shot back, her voice sharp with exhaustion. "Why would they poison the fences when they could just run off the whole herd? This is Maddox's work. It's slow, it's cruel. It has his signature all over it." "And how would you know?" William sneered. "Spending all your time in there drawing pictures with that little savage, maybe you're starting to think like one." "That's enough." Bartholomew's voice cracked like a whip. "The fighting stops in this house." But his command lacked its usual authority. The family was fracturing under the pressure, the cracks in their foundation spreading with each new threat. Feeling suffocated by the tension, Vivi began taking daily walks, ostensibly to check on the herd, but really to clear her head. On the third day, as she crested a familiar rise, she saw one of Tar's warriors waiting for her. He stood beside his horse, not as a threat, but as a silent sentinel. He beckoned for her to follow. Her heart pounded with a mixture of fear and curiosity, but she went. He led her through a winding, hidden canyon she had never known existed to a small, sheltered encampment. It was Tar's camp. It was not a war party, but a small, temporary settlement. Women were grinding corn, children were playing a quiet game with stones, and the smell of roasting piñon nuts hung in the air. It was a pocket of peaceful domestic life hidden away in the harsh landscape. Tar emerged from a hogan to greet her. Nizoni was with him, hopping on her good leg with the aid of a crutch, a wide, happy grin on her face when she saw Vivi. She rushed forward and hugged Vivi's legs, a simple, heartfelt gesture that melted a knot of tension in Vivi's chest. "My scout found the poison on your fences." Tar said, his expression serious. "We have cleaned the posts, but this man, Carmichael, he will not stop." "I know," Vivi admitted, her shoulders slumping. "My father thinks your being here is making it worse." "Perhaps," Tar conceded. "Or perhaps we are the only thing that has kept Maddox from burning your ranch to the ground." He gestured for her to sit by the fire. A woman handed her a warm, flat bread that tasted of corn and smoke. It was a simple offering of hospitality, but it felt profound. "Why are you doing this?" Vivi asked, looking him directly in the eye. "I refused your offer. I shamed you in front of your men." Tar stared into the fire for a long moment before answering. "My proposal was a matter of honor and tradition. It is the way my grandfather would have repaid such a debt. But I have watched your world. I have seen its sharp edges. Your refusal was not meant as an insult. I see that now. It came from your heart, from your own traditions. Honor cannot be a chain. My debt to you remains, but the payment must be one you can accept." He paused, his gaze lifting to meet hers. "The protection of your home, the safety of your family. This is a payment you can accept, yes." Vivi was taken aback by his insight, by his willingness to understand a world so different from his own. She saw him not as a suitor or a savage, but as a man, a leader, a father, grappling with a changing world just as she was. "Yes," she said softly, "I can accept that." These visits became a quiet ritual. Every few days, Vivi would meet a scout and be led to the hidden camp. She would spend an hour with Najoni, whose leg was mending remarkably well, and she would talk with Tar. He told her of the Red Canyon, his people's ancestral home, a place of soaring rock walls and sacred spaces that Carmichael's cattle were now trampling. She told him of her mother who had died of fever 5 years prior, and of her dream to one day have a small piece of land that was truly her own, a place where she wasn't constantly struggling against the land and the greed of powerful men. They were from different universes, yet they found common ground in their shared love for the land and their desire to protect their families. A deep, abiding respect grew between them, more solid and real than any forced marriage alliance. This fragile peace was inevitably shattered by William. Consumed by suspicion, he followed Vivi one afternoon. From a high ridge, he watched in horror as she sat by the Navajo fire, laughing with Najoni. In his prejudiced mind, he saw only one thing: betrayal. She was consorting with the enemy. He didn't confront her. Instead, he rode straight to redemption, his heart a cold, hard knot of fury. The town was buzzing with talk of Carmichael's lost cattle and the Indian trouble at the Dalton place. William, full of righteous anger and cheap whiskey from the saloon, let his tongue run loose. He told a group of Carmichael's ranch hands about his sister's secret meetings about the Navajo camp hidden in the canyons. He painted a picture of collaboration, of a sister who had turned her back on her own kind. He didn't realize that he wasn't just venting his anger, he was handing Flint Maddox the exact weapon he needed. When Vivi returned to the ranch that evening, the sun casting long, mournful shadows, she felt a profound sense of foreboding. The air was still too still. She looked toward the hills where Tar's warriors usually kept their vigil. There was nothing, just an empty, silent landscape. The uneasy alliance, the one thing standing between her family and ruin, had vanished, and she had a sickening feeling that she knew who was to blame. The silence from the hills was more menacing than any war cry. For 2 days there was no sign of Tar or his men. The landscape around the Dalton ranch felt naked, exposed. Bartholomew went about his chores with a grim, fatalistic air, while William alternated between sullen silence and defensive outbursts, refusing to meet Vivi's accusing gaze. He knew what he had done. His drunken words in town had been a betrayal, and the consequences were now hanging over them all like a storm cloud waiting to break. On the 3rd morning, the storm arrived. It began not with a raid, but with something far more insidious. As Bartholomew went to draw water from the well for the morning coffee, he was hit by a foul chemical stench. The water in the bucket was murky with an oily sheen on its surface. "Get back!" he yelled, dropping the bucket. "Don't drink it!" Someone under the cover of darkness had dumped a barrel of sheep dip or some other poison into their well, their only source of fresh water. It was a crippling blow, an act of calculated cruelty designed to make the ranch unlivable. They were being systematically dismantled piece by piece. Maddox. Vivi breathed the name like a curse on her lips. This is his answer to Tar's men leaving. Panic began to set in. Their canteens held less than a day's worth of water. The creek was nearly dry, and what little water remained was barely fit for cattle, let alone human consumption. They were isolated, vulnerable, and being choked out. As if on cue, 2 riders appeared on the horizon. It was Flint Maddox and the town sheriff, a man named Brody. Sheriff Brody was a paunchy, world-weary man who generally tried to keep the peace, but was known to be squarely in Leland Carmichael's pocket. They rode up to the homestead, and Maddox surveyed the scene with a smug satisfaction. "Morning, Dalton. Having some trouble?" he asked, his eyes gleaming with mock sympathy. "You poisoned our well, Maddox," Vivi accused, stepping forward, her hands clenched into fists. Maddox chuckled. "Now that's a serious accusation. You got any proof, Sheriff does, that sound like something a respectable citizen like myself would do?" Sheriff Brody shifted uncomfortably in his saddle, avoiding eye contact. "Vienna, unless you saw him do it, you can't go around saying things like that." "This is Carmichael's doing," Bartholomew said, his voice a low growl. "He wants our land, and he'll stop at nothing to get it." "All Mr. Carmichael wants is what's fair," Maddox said smoothly. "And speaking of fair, Sheriff Brody, here has some paperwork for you." The sheriff cleared his throat and produced a sheaf of papers. "Bartholomew Dalton, I have a foreclosure notice here from the Bank of Redemption. Says you're 3 months behind on your loan payments. I also have a lien on your herd filed by the general store for an outstanding debt of $200. He paused, looking genuinely regretful for a moment. "I'm sorry, Bartholomew. The bank is calling in the note. You have 1 week to pay the full amount owed, or they'll seize the property." It was a death sentence, the culmination of Carmichael's patient, predatory strategy. He owned the bank. He had an interest in the store. He had squeezed the Daltons from every direction, and now he was closing his fist. 1 week, Bartholomew croaked, the color draining from his face. "That's impossible." "Them's the rules," Maddox said with a final triumphant smirk. "Enjoy your week." He and the sheriff turned and rode away, leaving the Daltons standing in the dust, their world collapsing around them. Despair, thick and suffocating, settled over the family. William finally broke his anger, dissolving into shame. "It's my fault," he mumbled, staring at the ground. "I told them. In the saloon. I told them you were meeting with the Navajo. I gave Maddox the opening he needed." Vivi looked at her brother, at the pathetic, broken figure he cut, and felt a surge of pity rather than anger. "What's done is done, William," she said, her voice weary. "Fighting amongst ourselves is what they want." As the sun began to set, casting the poisoned well in a long, dark shadow, Vivi made a decision. There was only one person who might be able to help them. One person who understood this land, as well as Carmichael, but with a wisdom Carmichael could never possess. Taking the last full canteen of water and a small sack of jerky, she saddled Buck. "Where are you going?" her father asked, his voice hollow. "To find Tar," she said. "He knows the land. He knows the hidden springs. And right now, he's the only friend we've got." She rode out into the twilight, not towards the hidden camp, but north toward the Red Canyon she knew he called home. She was following a desperate hunch, a faint hope that he hadn't abandoned them entirely, but had merely withdrawn to protect his own people after William's betrayal had exposed their location. She rode for hours the landscape lit by a sliver of moon. It was a dangerous, lonely journey. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat. Finally exhausted and near despair, she saw the faint, distant flicker of a campfire nestled deep within a rocky pass. She approached cautiously, calling out before she got too close. "Ta, it's Vienna Dalton." A warrior stepped out of the shadows, his rifle leveled at her chest. He recognized her and lowered the weapon, motioning for her to enter. She found Ta sitting by the fire with a half-dozen of his warriors. His face was grim. "Your brother's words put my people in danger," he said, his voice flat and devoid of its former warmth. "Maddox now knows where to look for us. We had to move." "I know, and I am sorry for what he did," Vivi said, her voice pleading. "But Maddox has made his move. He's poisoned our well. The bank is foreclosing. We have 1 week before we lose everything." Ta listened without expression, his dark eyes fixed on her face. The silence stretched, and Vivi's hope began to fade. She had insulted his honor. Her brother had betrayed his trust. Why should he help them? This Carmichael Taha. "Ta," said finally breaking the silence. "He is like a disease, a blight on the land that poisons everything it touches. He thinks because he has fences and paper laws that he owns the earth. He does not understand. The land owns itself." He stood up, his decision made. "He has brought war to my people and to yours. He has dishonored the water which gives life to all. This cannot stand." He turned to his men. "Break camp. We ride at first light." He looked back at Vivi, and for the first time since she arrived, she saw a flicker of the man she had come to respect. "Your fight is now my fight, not for honor, not for a debt, but for the land, and for our children." Vivi felt a surge of relief so profound it almost buckled her knees. The alliance was not broken. It had been forged anew, not in tradition or gratitude, but in the fires of a common threat. As she watched the Navajo warriors prepare to move, she knew this was no longer just about saving her family's ranch. It was about making a stand. Ta's plan was one of strategic cunning, not open warfare. He understood that Carmichael's strength, his massive herd, could be turned into a weakness. Using their combined knowledge of the terrain, his warriors would ghost the 3,000 head of cattle deep into the labyrinthine Red Canyon, scattering them where Carmichael's cowboys would take weeks to find them. The Daltons' role was crucial. They had to delay the inevitable fury of Flint Maddox. Late the next afternoon, Maddox arrived like a thunderclap, his face livid. "Where are they?" he bellowed, dismounting with a fury that spooked his own horse. "Where is Carmichael's herd? Your Indian friends just spirited them away." "I've no idea what you're talking about, Flint," Vivi replied, her voice a mask of calm over a hammering heart. Her coolness only enraged him further. He shoved William aside to get in Vivi's face. "I'm going to ask you one more time." His threat died in his throat. Bartholomew stood on the porch, his old Winchester rifle leveled squarely at Maddox's chest. "The boy told you to leave," he said, his voice as cold and steady as the rock of the mesas. Maddox froze, caught. Hissing a curse, he backed away to his horse. "This isn't over," he snarled. "When Carmichael gets here tomorrow, he'll bring the law the army if he has to. You and your savage friends will hang." He galloped away, leaving his threat to poison the air. That evening, Ta returned his mission a success. "It is done," he announced simply. "It will be the work of a season to gather them." They gathered around a small fire, the two families, one white one, Navajo united by the day's victory. Nijoni, her leg nearly healed, sat close to Vivi, a quiet symbol of their intertwined fates. It was then that Tar looked at Vivi, his expression somber. "My offer of marriage was born of old ways," he began, his voice low and resonant. "I see now that the world is changing. A bridge between our people is needed, but it cannot be built on debt or tradition alone." He held her gaze, his sincerity absolute. "I will ask you again, Vienna May Dalton, not as payment for a life, but as a beginning. Not for my hand in marriage, but for a partnership. Let us join our families. Let us face this new world together as allies, as equals." This was not the same proposal. It was not about repayment. It was a choice freely offered, a chance to build something new. Vivi looked at her father, who gave a slow, deliberate nod of approval. She looked at William, who met her gaze with newfound respect. Finally, her eyes returned to Tar, the proud leader who had seen her not as an object of honor, but as a person. "Yes," Vivi said, her voice clear and strong in the desert night. "Yes, I will be your partner." The future was a dangerous unknown. Carmichael was coming, and the fight was far from over. But for the first time, the homestead did not feel like a lonely outpost on the edge of ruin. Under the vast star-dusted Arizona sky, a new kind of family had been forged, not of blood, but of courage, and a shared hope for the dawn. And so Vienna's story doesn't end with a wedding dress and a quiet life. It begins with a handshake and a promise to stand together against a world that sought to divide and conquer. Her act of saving one child rippled outwards, forging an alliance that would redefine the very meaning of family and community in the unforgiving West. Their fight against Leland Carmichael was just beginning, but now they faced it not as isolated victims, but as a united front, a testament to the idea that true strength is found not in dominance, but in mutual respect. This wasn't just a story of a rescued girl. It was the story of how two cultures on a dusty patch of Arizona land chose understanding over hatred and partnership over prejudice. If this story of courage, honor, and the birth of an unlikely alliance moved you, please take a moment to hit the like button and share it with someone who appreciates tales of the untamed West. And be sure to subscribe to our channel. We're dedicated to uncovering and telling the stories you won't find in the history books, the real human dramas that shaped the heart of America. Click that subscribe button and the notification bell so you never miss another journey into the past. Thank you for listening.